Welcome to John Teaches Sean About His Brain, the podcast where I, Sean, embark on a journey to understand what's happening in my own head. Spoiler alert, I have no clue, but that's precisely why we're here. In each episode, I explore questions about the brain that I believe will resonate with all of us. Like, why can't I turn my brain off at 3 a.m.? Why my memory only works when it feels like it? And why my brain seems to betray me when I need it most. Listen, I'm not a scientist. I'm no expert. I'm just a guy looking to unravel the mysteries of my own mind. Fortunately, I happen to know a cognitive neuroscientist who is an expert in the brain, and I get to ask him all the questions I want. So, if you're curious, confused, or simply along for the ride, welcome. And hey, if you like what you hear, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe to the podcast, or whatever it is you do wherever you listen to podcasts. I don't know how the algorithms work. I just know that your support keeps this journey moving forward. And together, we might just discover something remarkable. This is John Teaches Sean About His Brain. Let's get started. Hi, John. It's good to see you.
Hey, Sean. Great seeing you.
How was your Christmas?
It was great. Had a good time, had family in, and got to spend time with them. And yeah, I had a really good time. How about yours?
It was good. I actually had both of my kids were able to come and their families, or my daughter's boyfriend. But it was really nice to have everybody together. And like I think I told you in a meeting we were having, but I had a friend of ours from Kansas fly in, and she got to. She's in Hoxie, Kansas. Which
Hoxie.
Every time she says it, it sounds made up to me. But
well, I had to look it up. I'm from Kansas, and I wasn't sure where that was, so I had to look it up. It's
kind
of a small town.
I think that says everything.
Yeah, good.
She's actually a teacher in Hoxie, so
all right.
I thought that would. She teaches life skills, which is
That's needed.
I'm always impressed when I hear a school doing that, because I know not a lot of schools teach kids about finance and writing checks. I didn't think they still did that, but yeah,
that is great.
Yeah,
in my
so it's
school,
neat
to go back to high school and learn some life skills.
I could have used some life skills. I could still use some life skills. So.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's on your mind this week?
Well, I was reading actually just this morning. There's a website called Freethink, and it has a lot of really interesting, up-to-date things and things that are happening or things that are about to happen. And so there's like philosophy things and technology things and AI and all of these different things kind of that you can choose from. And I just saw something that caught my eye, and it was the title was something like we've waited 40 generations or 40 generations were not able to read what we're able to read today. And it was a story about Mount Vesuvius in Italy, which was a few miles, or Pompeii was a few miles from this mountain.
Yeah.
And it erupted back in AD, like 80, 70 something or 80, right around there. And Julius Caesar's father-in-law, I believe it was, lived on the beachfront next to a town named after Hercules, I think. It was. They gave some history behind it, which was interesting. Mm-hmm. But he had one of the largest private libraries of anybody of that time. And I guess wealthy individuals would have their own private libraries. And apparently there was a lot of reading available in that time, because they didn't have printing presses, but they had a fairly elaborate system of scribes who would write and rewrite documents, where that's all they did for their everyday, every day they would come to work and just write and rewrite things. And so the Romans were known for kind of being prolific writers and putting out a lot of information. But because of wars, and most of them were on scrolls, so because of wars, because of earthquakes, because of volcanoes, a lot of that early writing is gone. And they said in this article that they think there's less than 1% of the writings from that time still available. But
Wow.
his library was an interesting find back, I think in the 1700s, they uncovered it. It was under like over 100 feet or a couple hundred feet of ash and like
Mm,
hot mud, that covered it.
hmm
So as they're digging it out, all of these scrolls, they showed a picture of it. It looked like a really long roll of toilet paper that was just burnt to a crisp. And so they have these scrolls. They tried to open some and they just break off into little tiny pieces. And thank goodness they decided to save them in a vault, thinking maybe later they would be able to figure out how to open them and read them. And so what just happened recently, and I think it started, he said during COVID, some people were talking and saying, uh, let's create a contest to see if we can engage a lot of people to try to solve how to get text out of, burnt scrolls.
hmm
And so they took a plane load of scrolls, they flew them from Italy up to the UK, and they scanned them like a CT scan, where you can see different, where it scans different layers. They're still rolled up, but
Right.
it's all these
Right.
different layers. And then they made them available to people to say, if you can figure these out, there's a large prize available for you. So several different groups were trying to figure this out, and they created software that would take these rolls, these layers that you get on the CT scan, and unroll it. Basically, they would put layers together from different and then lay it out. So they're able to lay that out, and it's burnt, and all this stuff's smushed on it. But they were able to find different patterns. Like there was patterns for the papyrus paper that was very distinct, and there was
Mm,
patterns of mud, and there was patterns of ink that they were able to find, and they were able to create using AI. They
of
were
course.
able to
Yep.
have the computer separate all of these different patterns out, where it would leave them with basically the text written in Latin, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to ask if it said, is that, I assume that would be in Latin.
I think, although some of it, yeah, I think they said it was mostly in Latin.
Yeah.
I think there was some Greek as well,
hmm
but
Yeah.
mostly Latin. And they were able to come up with one scroll that they gave. They gave everybody one scroll. Here's the one scroll. The access to, they didn't give it to them. They gave them the
Right.
CT
Right.
scans from one scroll and said, here it is. And they were able, it was three people. Uh, One was a 21-year-old from America. One was like a 24-year-old from another country. Anyway, these are basically computer people that just
hmm
figured out how to write the algorithms to break all of this down. And they came up with that scroll with 15 columns of text that was the computer also translated. And everybody's extremely excited about it. And they said that they've given there's another contest going on right now that's just opened up. If anybody wants to join in, it's for $2 million if you are the first one to crack the code into whatever. And they're saying that the methodology they developed will cost about $1 million per scroll. So they're not wanting to read all of them right yet.
Right.
But if
Right.
they can get that cost down to 100,000 or 10,000 per scroll, then they'll start reading more and more scrolls so we can learn more and more about Rome. I just thought that was so fascinating that you
And
have
fascinating is the word
scrolls
I
that are
had too.
burnt and it looks like toilet
Yep.
paper just scrunched up, and you're able to somehow get text out. Like how? It's just mind boggling.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
You're asking the
crazy.
wrong guy. I'm hoping that was rhetorical.
It was rhetorical.
That
Yeah,
is fascinating, though. That's a really interesting story. So,
yeah.
um, a couple of episodes ago, you brought up schemas, and you did in that episode define what a schema was. You actually gave a really good, I guess, example, not an analogy, but either way, about a restaurant that seemed really easy for me to understand. But um, I have to admit, I still don't feel like I fully understand what a schema is. I kind of understood the definition, and the example that you provided made sense to me. But I'm afraid I'm going to need some more from you. So it might be easier if we can go back and then, and let's just, if you would just define what a schema is again.
Okay. And it's not surprising that it's a little bit confusing, because this is the fascinating part about neuroscience and about trying to learn about the brain and the mind, is that a lot of it, a lot of what we know is taken from concepts we've formed about what the brain does. So a schema is not something that's located. You can't go into like the one of the lobes of the brain and say, here on this bump, this wrinkle, this gyrus right here is where a schema is located, like you can other things. It's more like it's a way, it's a label that describes something that the brain does. And so once you have a description of what the brain does, then you can start studying it.
Right.
So let me define it, and then we'll kind of talk about what that means. So schemas are mental frameworks or mental models that inform us of how the world works. So it's like a knowledge-based network of information that helps us understand things. So
Okay.
schemas help us make sense of the world, so to speak. So
Okay.
when we have been exposed to something and we have that experience, then the next time we're exposed to that, it makes more sense to us because of a previous exposure. And so that sounds a little bit like memory, but it's more in depth than that. So to try to study how that happens and how that works, or what might influence that, or how those experiences can build and help us understand new similar things, the label schema was developed so that researchers could then start creating situations in the lab that would have people to experience something and then see how they encode that and how it affects them later. So schemas was the word that came up for that. Does
But
that make sense?
yeah,
Okay.
as a
Okay.
label of something that it's not anything physical that you
Mm-hmm.
can, crack somebody's skull open and see it,
Right.
but we need a way to describe this thing that the brain does that seems like it's not a lot maybe, but it seems like every day that I go out and I try to make sense of the world, because and also it happens really fast and without me knowing about it. Um, and so I'm trying to make sense of a lot of things. Uh, I'm just how bogged down my day would be if I had to think about going back to your example of every time that I go to a restaurant, I have to figure out how to. So, just a really quick story, because it just popped in my head. But I go to New York for the very first time. Never been to New York, and I have a schema at this point. I'm in my 30s. I have a schema for how to order at a restaurant. I thought, and I'm telling you this story because I want to see if how this fits into what you're saying. But I go into a deli in New York, and there's this line, and I have seen Seinfeld before. I know about the soup Nazi, but I walk in, and so I'm next up, and I look up at the board, and I order a number this sandwich that I want, and I start asking for no tomato. I start making, and the guy looks at me, honestly stunned, and he curses at me. The proprietor of the deli, who I am the customer, he swears at me, and all of a sudden I just froze. I was standing there. There's this long line of people, and this guy it raised his voice at me and cursed at me, and I had no I just was I didn't know what to do, so I just said number 3. I just ordered something on the board that because I just wanted to get out of there. I was so embarrassed. So I got my I got my sandwich and just got out of that deli as quick as I could. But um, I would say I didn't have a schema for how to order in a New York deli.
No, you had a Subway schema where
Yeah,
you get to tell them then what you want and what you don't. Leave that
there's a
up. And
sandwich artist behind the counter that's
yeah,
going to do it the way I want it.
exactly. Yeah, and I think in New York there's enough people that if he runs a couple of customers off, it's okay because there's more. Plus, he's probably thinking somebody needs to teach this guy that you can't just order a sandwich and say no tomatoes. We don't have time for that. We've got our system down.
You know what? Now that you say that, it does. He loses me as a customer, and I'm not from New York, so I would have probably not been a customer anyway. But the efficiency that he might get out of this process is you step up and you order and you get out of the way. Oh, okay.
But let's say you did live in New York.
Mm-hmm.
So you said, I'm not going to go to that restaurant again. So you go to a different sandwich shop and say, I'll take a number 4 with no cucumbers, no tomato. You get cursed at again. Now you're like, oh, I'm going to get cursed at every time. So I'll just order the number 3 or the number 4 and leave it at that. And then you have a good experience. So you might go back to that restaurant, the first one.
So question.
Your scheme has changed.
This might be the wrong question, but how many times do I have to go to a deli and get yelled at before I start to form a schema for a New York deli?
So every experience contributes somewhat to your schemas. So your schemas get adjusted each time. But how many times you have to go, I guess, is how long it takes you to decide if you're the problem or if he's the problem.
Oh,
so that might be a little bit different than a schema. You might have the schema going, I get yelled at, but I shouldn't. So they need to learn that I can order my sandwich how I want to order it. I'm the customer. So you just go keep saying no tomatoes and getting yelled at and then yell back at him. That would be, he probably knew you weren't from New York because you didn't yell back at him.
Oh, okay. Good. That's true. Very true.
I said no blankety blank tomatoes.
And like I said, that might be the wrong example to ask that question, but and I know there might not be a like 5 times, but I'm interested how schemas are built.
Yeah, let's start there because that is right. So schemas are built through experience. So it's from you going and experiencing your world and learning about it that expands your network of pieces of information and knowledge you have about whatever it is you're experiencing. And so like if we take it way back, and let's just say that you have a child that's, 2 years old. And let's say that they have, for some reason, this is a hypothetical, right? Because this probably would never happen. But let's just say that they've never seen a dog before. So they've never seen a dog on TV. And I know there's cartoons with dogs, Bluey and all of that. So they've never watched any of that. They've never been around like outside where there's been a dog. So they have no dog schema. And so the father or the mother take the child outside one day and somebody's walking a dog in their front yard. And so they stop and say, hi to the person and then kind of pet the dog. And they say to their child, look at the puppy, come pet the puppy. This is a dog. You see this dog? And so now that child has an experience with a dog. So that first experience, anytime you're first developing a schema, it's really, really broad. So the schema can't start defined where it can discriminate between types of dogs and cats and cows and all of that. It just thinks, if there's, maybe it's something as simple as just 4 legs and a tail is a dog. That's kind of what their brain starts to put together. Oh, this is a dog. So it has another experience with a dog and you're going, oh, that's a dog. So it's going, okay, 4 legs and a tail. And then a cat comes up and the child goes, doggy. Mm-hmm. And you're going, no, that's not a doggy. That's a cat. And
it has 4 legs and a tail though.
Cat. Yeah, exactly. Like what? So now I've got to develop a schema for cats. So I have the start of a dog schema and a cat schema. And then, maybe you see a cow or a horse or something you're driving. And so you just start developing these schemas. And the more experience you have with them, the more you start to learn. Then you start developing schemas for small dogs and large dogs and for, sporting breeds and hunting breeds and all of these different categories and classifications we have. You don't know and can't understand those initially until you've started experiencing those things. Then you start developing schemas for all of those different types of dogs and cats and cows and that type of thing.
So because this just explained a question, but I want to point out the question that I had. You were bringing up dogs, the 2-year-old, but in the same household, you could have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old child. One of them could be deathly afraid of dogs and the other one not. But based on that 2-year-old goes out, has that experience with the dog. Come pet the dog, all that, and it's great. But the 4-year-old, when they were 2 and they had never seen a dog, and they go out and the dog snaps at them or maybe bites them, whatever it is. So that could really be intense enough that I am afraid of dogs. My schema is dogs are going to bite me. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So that, and phobias can be developed through schemas, just for exactly what you're talking about.
So go a little more about that, phobias.
So like one of the things that Casey and I tried to do with our kids when they were little was just to let them experience a lot of things in everyday life, just to try to, I don't know, just simple things. But like, for an example, I was at my parents' house and we were grilling out, and a wood bee, which they're really large. I don't know if you've seen wood bees, but they're
wood bee.
Yeah, they burrow into like wooden beams, like on porches. There'll be a little hole, and that's where the wood bees. It's like not a bumblebee, but a wood bee. So they're larger than bumblebees, but they don't sting you. So they're
I like them already.
Yeah, they're super cool, and they fly kind of slower, and they're big. And one flew into the grill and it burned its wings, and so it fell to the concrete patio below. So I called my kids over and was going, look at this bee, and it's fuzzy. You can pet it, because I knew it wouldn't sting them. So they were being really gentle and petting it, and just, we were talking about the bee. So they grew up without really fear of, and we would do the same thing with a spider or whatever. Although I hate spiders, if they're in my house, they're dead. But if they're outside my house, they're not. And so we let them live or whatever. And that, there'd be the really big garden spiders that build these big webs between trees, and they sit there. That unfortunately, sometimes when you're running, you run into one.
You walk through or run through one. Yes.
But they got used to those types of things, and we didn't overreact to that. But if you compare it to a person who, the minute they see a spider, they scream, and a kid's 2 years old and they're like, it's like, whoa, that must be really bad because dad just screamed or mom just screamed. And so now they're going to grow up thinking that spiders are terrifying and bees are terrifying and bugs. And so just those interactions they have can create a fear of things or not.
So I think the next thing, I think I'm starting to understand the purpose of, because I get how they're formed, experience. And then depending on the experience, how many times I have to experience it to start building them. But we were in the beginning kind of said that they're a mental framework to help me make sense of the world. But tell me more about that.
Yeah. So it's
about that part.
I wouldn't say the goal, but one of the things that they help us do really well is understand what we're experiencing in the moment. Because even though it seems like our lives are routine and we do the same thing every day, things do change from day to day. Like just driving to work, you think, oh, I do that every day, but there's different traffic patterns and somebody might swerve in front of you, or, there's just different things we experience. So they help you really quickly, kind of automatically understand what you're experiencing. So you don't have to use a lot of neural resources, and it kind of frees up cognitive resources to do other things. So you're not sitting there trying to figure out, I can't order this without tomatoes, or what's going on, or if you think back, I gave an example a episode or two ago about when I brought a sack of pork into the house, like pork chops and ham and bacon, and set it down, and the possum crawled out, and I stood there like I was frozen. I didn't know how to respond because I didn't have a schema for that. I was just like, I don't know what's happening. It's not that I didn't know how to respond to a possum in the house. I didn't even know what was happening at that. It's just like I was blank. And I think if a mouse would have jumped out of that, I would have immediately responded to that by trying to stomp on it, or I guess that doesn't sound good. Trying to gently catch it and release it back outside might be a better way to say it.
But have you had a mouse in the house before?
Unfortunately, we have, because we live on about 4 or 5 acres in
Mhm.
fields around us. And so they try to get in winters and things like that. So
That
yeah,
wasn't said with judgment, by the way.
no,
It was more
no,
to the point. But
I'm
you're
scared my
saying
wife will listen to this podcast because she's terrified if people know we have mice in it. And I'm saying everybody has
every,
them. It's just if you let them cohabitate with you is when it gets bad.
that's when it's weird.
Yeah, because she'll find, like, we'll see a mouse run by, and
Mhm.
then the next thing I know, all the dishes are out of the cabinet. All of the dishes are out of the cabinet. All of them are out of the cabinet, and we're washing them in Clorox. So it's a very big ordeal. So I try very hard to kind of cut things off at the pass with mice, with traps and different things to keep
Yeah.
them out.
But going back to the original point of, or the reason I
Yes.
asked that question is you've had experience with a mouse in the house before.
So I would have known immediately.
So you wouldn't
It's a
have
mouse.
frozen
Boom.
necessarily.
No,
Right. Okay.
I would have just boom responded to it. Now that I've had a possum in the house, I might not freeze next time. I might go, that's a possum, and try to do some. But it was just I was frozen because I couldn't figure that out. So if you think about the kind of benefit of schemas or their purpose is, if we didn't have them, then even if a mouse jumped out, I wouldn't know. It would be like new to me, and I wouldn't know what to do. Like every event would be new. Like going into the shop, the sandwich shop in New York, you wouldn't have even understood this. You wouldn't even had a Subway schema. You would have just gone in like, what am I doing here? I know there's food in here, but I don't know what to do. So schemas help you make
Oh,
sense of your world.
wait, though, because even in my example of the deli,
Mm-hmm.
I knew when I walked into the deli, I knew that the menu was on a board
Mm-hmm.
behind his head. Without schemas, I wouldn't necessarily know even what that board. I'd have to figure out. Oh, that has the stuff on it that I'm going to order.
Yeah. And so it wouldn't have just been, oh, I didn't have a schema to know that I couldn't order tomatoes on my sandwich. It would have been, you
I
just
don't
walk
have a
in and look
deli
around
schema at
like,
all. Who's
what
that
do I
guy
do in
behind the
here?
counter?
Yeah.
What are those words up on the wall? Why are all these people standing the way that they're standing?
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, I may be, this may be hyperbolic, but I'm running down. Those are all schemas, right? I understand
Yes.
why people are standing the way they are. That's a line.
Yes.
I
That's a schema.
understand that I order the sandwich from him before I pay for it. I understand how to pay for it.
And that's
Those,
also why it can be stressful when you walk into a Starbucks or something and there's a line you don't know which end to go to because you
yeah.
can't figure out which side you order and which side you pick, and you stand there for a minute trying to figure it out because you have a schema that I've got to get to the back of a line. I can't just walk up to the counter, but which side's the back of the line? Because if you ever do pick the wrong side, you get chewed out really quickly and yelled at by several people. So you want
But
to
we're
avoid
getting
that.
down to, there's a schema for how to stand in line.
Yeah,
We have that.
and schemas have activities tied to them as well, and those are referred to as scripts. So it could be your schema is, I know how to order a sandwich in this restaurant, but the script is, how do I pay for it? Like, do they ring it up on the board? Do I use a card? Do I use cash? If I give cash, am I going to expect change? How much change am I going to expect? Those are kind of scripts that are embedded within schemas.
But those are built. Let's just stick with the coffee shop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, well, two questions. When do we start forming schemas immediately, like as a baby, or when around do we start forming schemas?
Yeah, just even pre-birth. So just different the way your brain is, as the brain is forming, it's trying to make connections any way it possibly can with anything. That's how the neurons in your brain survive, is by sending signals back and forth to each other. So they're trying to connect and respond to a lot of different things and create connections and networks. Our brains, it's our DNA sets it up where it's trying to make connections and build networks for things. It's trying to see patterns, and it does that really from the start. It's just, you're starting with very few patterns and schemas when you're born, and it just builds from there.
So I take my 2-year-old. That seems to be we have a 2-year-old. This poor 2-year-old who's never seen a dog
Yeah.
before either. But I take the 2-year-old to a coffee shop, and I walk up and stand in line and go through the process of the coffee shop. I don't need to go through every, order the coffee, pay for the coffee, all that stuff. And the 2-year-old sees me doing this and then
Yeah,
sees like over and over again. And that's how they build a schema for a Starbucks,
absolutely.
essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when we, at some point when we walk in, they know if there's people in a line, they have to stand in that line.
Absolutely. They know that they have to sit down on a bus, that there's different stops, that you have to wait for people. They know that the wheels on the bus go round and round. They know that the driver on the driver of the bus opens the door, whatever that song is. I mean, they're
But they
learning
learn
most
that from the
songs.
song.
Yeah, from songs, from what they see, from what when they're with you going into a coffee shop. Everything is they're learning from.
What they see
Absolutely.
on TV.
Absolutely. Yep.
So they watch a cartoon on TV
Hmm.
and, they get the people in the cartoon get on a bus. They're
Hmm.
learning how to behave on a bus from the cartoon.
Unfortunately, yeah, they learn that dogs that fall off of or coyotes that fall off cliffs just bounce on the ground below and get up and run off, which doesn't happen. So they don't have opportunities to do that usually, but they
Yeah.
learn everything like that. So it takes a while for their schemas to be built enough to really start understanding the world as it is. But I mean, that's okay. You're still learning and understanding things.
Okay. So the deli, the restaurant, the coffee shop, these schemas,
Hmm.
um, is there a different I mean, are there different kinds of schemas?
Yeah, there's several different kinds.
Oh, okay.
So like there's schemas for objects. We've talked about like a
A
dog,
dog. Okay.
uh,
Yeah.
uh, the board that you order from, or a table or chair. It's those types of objects. There's schemas for those. So you might have like a schema for a chair, and what it is, it's something you sit in, and then you go to a furniture museum or something. They're saying that's a chair. Like, that's a chair. So your schema has to expand to go, how would I sit in that thing? So there's schemas for objects like that.
Okay.
Um, there's also schemas for events. So let's say that you walk up, you're taking your 2-year-old again to a park, and you see an adult. There's several adults and kids playing, and one adult runs over and grabs or just kind of walks up to this park and runs over and grabs one of the kids, let's say a 7-year-old kid, and turns them upside down and bumps their head on the ground over and over, like repeatedly. Do you have a schema for that? You'd be
No.
like, hey, somebody stop that guy. Like, what's he doing? But the kid's laughing and the other adults are laughing. You're going, what's going on? And you're looking, and then you realize it's an Irish family. And I learned this a while ago, that the Irish, for one of their birthday traditions is the birthday bump, where they take somebody, turn them upside down, and bump their head on the ground, however many years old they are. I mean, not hard. You just like 7 bumps, bump, 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 7 times, and then everybody's laughing, and that's part of their birthday rituals. And if you have that schema, that doesn't confuse you at all. But if you're sitting there seeing it for the first time, you're like, what is happening here? Should I step in or not? And that's because there's schemas for events like birthdays, restaurants that we talked about, those types of events. Like if you go to a movie, if you go to the theater to see a play, those. There's also,
Oh, no, no, no. Put those together. Sorry.
yeah,
The birthday and the restaurant put together. So at some restaurants, if I'm sitting there and I hear a line of servers clapping and
yeah.
singing, I know exactly what's going on at somebody's birthday.
Now you do, but do you remember the first time
It was
that
what
happened?
I don't necessarily remember it, but I'm imagining it was like what is happening?
Yeah, I
What is
remember
going
the
on
first
here?
time that happened, when I was like, what are they doing? And I saw them clapping and going. It literally, I was like, are we supposed to get up and leave? I didn't know what to do. And then I just heard them
Right.
singing happy birthday. And I was like, oh. And then after that, when you hear the clapping. But yeah,
Okay. Situational schema.
yeah, kind of like a
What are some others?
situational during events. Well, there's social schemas, and that gives you, I guess, so some of these overlap a little bit, but a social schema could be also in a restaurant, like how people act, or how you act in groups, how groups of people act. You can have a schema for like what to expect. Schemas help you know what to expect so things don't surprise you. So when you go on X, you kind of know what to expect. You know that there's going to be somebody trying to say something really profound, and then there's going to be 500 people afterwards just making fun of them and tearing them down. And so you have your schema of what that looks like. And so there's social schemas. There's schemas for people, and that's like there's several categories of that. So you can have a schema for mother that is your mom. So if you think about your mom, you have a rich schema. I mean, it's very broad and complex because of all the experiences you've had with your mother. And then you know kind of what you would expect her to do, or expect how you would expect her to act, or what you would expect her response to be to something you said or did, because you have so many schemas. Your schema is so rich around mother. Or it could be a schema about a type of person, like a policeman or a teacher or a librarian. So we have schemas for librarians, right? And you can probably think about what those, like whether that's actually what librarians are like, or all of them are not like, probably what our schema is.
So we're
We have
starting to
schemas for
get
that.
into I'm starting to get a little bit crossed up with my understanding of what a stereotype is. So is that
Schemas are what create stereotypes.
so when I think about a librarian,
Mm-hmm.
I am picturing number one, a female, which
Mm-hmm.
is, I'm not saying this is right. I'm actually saying I feel like this is wrong, but I'm picturing a female, and who is, um, just kind of withdrawn and shy. Like I feel like that's a stereotype of a librarian.
Yeah.
So what's the difference in this specific case with the librarian between a schema and a stereotype?
So schemas create stereotypes. I don't know that there's really a difference. A stereotype is a schema. So, and it's because it's your experiences with librarians, and it's not just the times you've been in a library, but it's how they're portrayed on television, how they're portrayed in movies. When you're reading about librarians, when you hear things, when other people talk about librarians, when there's jokes about librarians, they're all about a certain stereotype.
They're always hushing you.
Yeah,
They're always
I got
shushing you.
shushed many times by.
Well, no, I'm going back to listen, John. I haven't been inside many libraries. Okay, so I have to rely on movies and TV shows to develop my scheme of a librarian. But um, so when does it become negative? I often think, I mean, stereotypes, I guess, exist for a reason, but I just feel like there's a negative aspect to a stereotype.
Yeah, we should have another episode about this and things tied to this, because I think that would be great. But for right now, I let's talk about it briefly. So when I was a college professor, we would come up with, discussing schemas, and that was part of what we were learning about. I would ask the students, are stereotypes good or bad? And almost all of them, they're bad. Everybody's saying they're bad. They're really bad.
My belief as well.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I was saying, no, stereotypes are not bad. They're extremely helpful because they're almost always true. And the only time that stereotypes are bad is when they're used against people, a person, or a group of people. That's when stereotypes are bad, because now you're saying that this one person is not an individual. This person is a group stereotype. So they don't really exist outside of their group. Their group defines them, which if you kind of reverse it and turn it back on yourself, I see you as an individual, me as an individual. I don't see us as Americans, just Americans where it's one group. I see us as individuals with our own ideas and our own views. But when we look at a different group, we don't see them as individuals within their group. We see them as, oh, this stereotype. It's
Yeah.
this person is a female, is kind of frail and always shushing people. And so that's kind of they're not an individual librarian. They're this stereotype. But stereotypes can help us with, with like choosing a pet, like a dog breed. There's stereotypes of pit bulls, and there's stereotypes of poodles and collies, and there's all these stereotypes. And it's okay to stereotype a pet, to say, I don't like cats. I do like dogs. I don't like little dogs. I like big dogs. Those types of stereotypes and biases are okay because they're not hurting anybody. It's when you use them against a person or a group of people that they become bad. So
Okay, that's helpful.
stereotypes
Very
just
helpful.
give us they give us an idea
Yeah.
of how. So maybe a lot of people get shushed by librarians, and that's maybe because we're talking out loud when we're not supposed to. But that person isn't just the librarian; they're an individual as well.
Right. Right. Okay. So hang on, because I sidetracked us. I have schemas for objects,
Objects,
for
events,
for you said people,
yeah, social and people. I was
social and
talking about people, like your
People.
mother, or a
and I
type of
derailed us.
person, or no, that's fine, or a type of person. Or there's also stereotypes for a group of people, like ethnicity, nationality, race, those types of things.
Yeah.
There's stereotypes for gender. Oh, a woman can't do that, or a man can't do that, and you put people in boxes based on gender. And there's also stereotypes for age, like the big one is boomers versus millennials versus Gen Z. So you have expectations. A person looks older, so that's a boomer, and now everything I associate with boomers is attached to that person, and they are not an individual; they're a boomer, and that's how I understand them and how I interact with them and react to them. So so it's people is another one, and then I think the last one is probably not the last one, but another one is our self schema. So we have an idea of what we are like and how we look to other people and how we present ourselves. And in our mind, we have this idea of, this is who I am, and this is how I present myself, and this is how people see me. And that can be off. And I don't know if you've ever watched a movie or a video of yourself.
Ugh.
I have, and it's like, that's just, I act like that. I say things like that. Those are my mannerisms. I don't see myself like that at all. Like, I see myself as really cool and saying the right thing and doing the right thing. And then I watch a video and I'm screwing everything up. It's like, I wouldn't even want to hang out with this guy. He's an idiot. So our self schemas are usually built to help us feel good about ourselves, but they're not always accurate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, since we've started this podcast, I go back and edit, and I'm looking at myself just going, I don't even know where to start with this guy.
That's why I don't watch these over.
I have to edit these things.
I know you have to.
So we have a pretty wide range of schemas that cover a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And I think we've touched on this, but I want to be specific, because you're saying that it's a mental framework. It helps us make sense of the world. And maybe that's enough, but schemas seem to be designed to help us in all of these areas.
Yes.
And they just help by speeding things up.
That's one of the ways. So they help us process information more quickly, more efficiently. So that frees up cognitive resources. So
you said less cognitive load, right?
Yeah. So it increases efficiency. It also improves our understanding of events. We kind of have already talked about that, but as just living and breathing and sitting here or walking, the world's kind of flowing into your sensory system. There's sounds, there's sights, there's flashes of light. You're interacting with people, especially if you're on the move. The world is kind of flowing through your sensory systems, and as that new information flows into the brain, it gets integrated into our mental frameworks, our mental models, to increase our knowledge and our understanding of things. So it helps us understand things more easily, so we're not having to process and figure things out. It allows for evaluation. So if you need to consider options, like you're going to make a decision and you need to say, if I did that, if I if I chose this, this is what would happen. But if I chose this, this other thing would happen. So A would make this happen. B would make this happen. Schemas allow you to kind of evaluate that because you already have an idea of what A would be like and what B would be like. Without schemas, you wouldn't be able to evaluate and compare those two options and their probable ramifications and outcomes.
But so when you're making a decision, that's you're on channel. You're using logic, reason, all the stuff in the on channel. But because I'm assuming schemas exist in the back channel.
Yes, you're right.
So your on channel is calling on your back channel to help make a decision.
Yeah. So your back channel pushes forward. It's schemas of like, so your on channel is going, I need to figure out whether to do A or B. And your back channel starts pushing forward the framework, the ideas, the interconnected framework of what A would mean and what B would mean. And it's not that it's always absolutely correct, because your schemas aren't always absolutely correct. They're based on your experiences.
Yeah.
So based on your experiences, here's what would probably be the best option. And then if I'm making that decision is based on my experiences, I might choose something different, or another person might choose something different because they're comparing the options and the outcomes based on their schemas of how things in their world have worked in the past, which predicts how they're probably going to work in the future.
That makes sense. So that's how they help us. And I know you like to try to stick to the positive parts of the brain and how it works, but how do they hinder us? How do schemas get in the way sometimes? Or do they?
They do.
Okay.
They do, unfortunately. So like almost everything, I mean, if you think about the tens or hundreds of thousands of years that our brains have been developing, if something's just always bad, it's probably not going to be a part of our system for very long. So the things that work really well or have worked in the past based on how we've needed to live and survive, those are the things that are still around that we're using. And so almost everything that, I would say everything, but I hate being definitive like that. So I say almost everything that our brain does, it has a purpose that helps us more than it hinders us. But everything can also hinder, really. If you have too much of a good thing, you've heard that, too much of a good thing can be bad for you.
Yeah.
So there are some hindrances, and I think the biggest one is the stereotypes and biases that we've already kind of mentioned, but maybe we'll go into that just a little bit more. We use our interactions with people to develop, our schemas are developed out of our interactions with people.
Mm-hmm.
And then we interpret their actions kind of to fit our schemas that we've developed. So now it kind of is a circular thing where their actions are what helped build my schema of them. So now anything they do is interpreted through my schema of them. And it may not be right. So if a person is kind of loud and bossy, and that's kind of how we build our schema, they're always just kind of yelling around, then we have a tendency to interpret all of their actions and behaviors as confirming that belief that they're loud and bossy. And if somebody doesn't know them yet and sees them for the first time and doesn't have a schema, they might not interpret that one event as them being obnoxious or whatever, but we go, oh yeah, that person's so obnoxious. Do you hear what they just said? And we kind of read into what they're doing to confirm what we already think about them. Does that make sense?
It does. The story we tell ourselves about, right? Like, because it seems like all of this is just raw data coming in. Mm-hmm. It's you brought up sounds, but right now interactions, it's just data. Mm-hmm. But then we attach a story to it, good or bad, and that leads to emotions, and then those emotions kind of help either build schemas or what's the words?
Refine
the schema based on the story I tell myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it goes from just a person, it goes to a group of people. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned earlier, like I want to think that I have my own characteristics and my own way of doing things and seeing the world, that I know I'm influenced on how I think because I am an American. So the American culture fits into that, but yet I'm not just that. I have my own set of experiences that it's different from other Americans.
Hmm.
And I act different from other Americans. And so I can see that about me, but then when we have very limited experiences with groups of people, we start seeing that group kind of like I was talking about the person being loud and bossy. So now we read everything they do through that filter and that schema.
Hmm.
We'll have a schema of what groups of people are like, and now it doesn't matter what they do. We're like, oh yeah, should have known. Yeah, we should have
That
known. That's the
fits.
way that person acts. That fits. That fits
That fits.
exactly. And then once we confirm it, that just broadens our schemas and makes it stronger so that we're more likely to see that later. So you kind of it's your brain's way of taking a shortcut so that every time you interact with somebody, you're not starting from zero. You take that shortcut because I already have all this knowledge built up, so I'm going to start from there. But that's kind of like cramming somebody into a box that now every kind of part of this schema you have about them or about their race or ethnicity or age or gender, it gets used to filter their behaviors through. And now I'm interpreting what they're doing based on my schemas. So, like an example of that, let's say that I'm invited to a gathering of people or whatever, somebody's house. There's a party of some kind, of birthday or whatever. So I get there and I'm late, and I go in and say, "Hey, sorry I'm late. The traffic was really bad and it helped me up a bit." And they're like, "Yeah, that's okay." And it's to me that's makes sense because the traffic was bad.
Reasonable. Yep.
Yeah, and then somebody else arrives about 3 minutes behind me, and they come in and they're from, let's say, a different ethnic group, and they say, "Hey, sorry I'm late," as they walk in, and in my mind, I might not say it, but the first thought is, they're late. I'm not surprised. Their kind's late to everything. So it's
Hmm.
just that thought that comes through. And instead of giving them the same leeway that I just used, I just said traffic was bad. So I could have said, they must be late because they got in the same traffic I got caught in. But instead it's, their kind's always late. And I'm using me as an example. I try very hard not to think things like that. But that can
Yeah.
be the first thought that comes to mind because you have that that schema and that idea. I'm going to start from the knowledge I already have built and interpret their behavior through that bank of knowledge that I already have.
And that's built from, excuse me, movies, um,
Mm-hmm.
like stand-up comedy routines. I'm trying to think of all of the ways that schema for that group of people are late, not on
Yeah.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And I would prefer not to have that thought, but it's been
Mm-hmm.
built.
Yeah.
Media, just all these different areas where it's been built. So the question is, can I change that? Is there a way to change my schema?
Absolutely. Yeah. Schemas are not static. It's not like once you build it, you've got it and you can't change it. They continue to change and kind of they're malleable and they mold and they change based on your experiences. So if you want to modify or change your schemas, you have to introduce new experiences to yourself so that you're experiencing something differently. And that's new knowledge. It kind of broadens your schema, and it's called accommodation. So you're building these schemas through accommodation by experiencing more things. So if you think, oh, I have a really negative thought every time I see an older person that starts to say something, I'm like, here goes another boomer talking again. If that thought's coming to mind, I don't like that, then I can start doing more things with people that are in that age group and hanging out with them a little bit more and having more experiences with them and getting to know them a little bit better. We'll have like, you'll say, oh, a grandparent or an aunt and uncle or parents. Like for me, it'd be, even older siblings. And it's like, I have experiences with people in that age group. So I feel like my schema is a little bit broader or more complex, but maybe somebody in their 20s, it's their grandparent, the grandparents that they aren't around very much. And so it's just easy to have that schema because those are your experiences. And then, sitcoms, comedies, there's always the old guy saying weird things everybody laughs at. And then, so it's reinforced in a lot of different ways. So if you want to change that, you can start being around those people more, for example.
Okay, but this is requiring a little bit of self-awareness, number one.
Yeah.
The thought comes up and I have to recognize that's not the appropriate thought. That's not the way I want to think. And then I have to, seek out, I guess. I have to find ways to create accommodations. You call that accommodation?
Yeah.
It's bringing to mind, maybe not a direct example, but I was just thinking back when I was in the Marine Corps and in boot camp, you get stuffed into a squad bay for 3 months with 60 other people. And in the Marine Corps, we're all males. They separated males and females in boot camp, but not the point. I had in my platoon, in my squad bay, a guy from, I think it was Alabama. This is 25 years ago, but he had never seen a person of color before he had never been around a person of color.
Wow. He's
ever.
From Alabama? Wow.
And he was from the South. I hate to say it that way, but I mean, and where he was from, the only experience he had with people of color was TV.
And probably stories.
And stories probably, right? And so he showed up on day one, and we had several guys in the platoon that were not white, that he didn't know what to do. And so he had 3 months of like accommodation because we were all stuck together 24 hours a day for 3 months. But he built a particular kind of schema there with these guys. But
he obviously became more comfortable, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because at the end of 3 months, I would say, and I think he would probably say that he didn't even think about it that way anymore. It was just, these are some Marines that I trust with my life. But
there's been media through movies, TV shows, even articles or news articles that are written play such a huge role in these stereotypes. Like, is the bad guy, the drug addict that's carrying a gun in a movie, are they usually white or black?
Yeah.
They're always black.
Always black. Yeah.
And is the smart person that figures things out white or black? They're almost always white.
It's white. And it's a white guy.
And it's a white guy,
by the way.
Yeah, a white guy. And it's that's not how the world works. And it's really sad because there were some studies. It's reminding me of an example I would give in classes that I would teach. And I had the video for it. But there were some researchers that were asking elementary school children. They just had a color palette stretched out, and it went from white to a dark brown in like 10 different shades. It got progressively darker and darker. And they would ask elementary school kids to look at that and pick out the color of the person. If there's a person that's smart, where would they fall on this? And so these are like white kids.
Yeah.
And they're going, oh, they point immediately, like no thought, oh, the white side. And if there's a child, if one of your classmates is acting up in class and being bad, which side is? Oh, it's this side over here, the dark brown side. And the student that's dumb and doesn't understand, oh, it's the dark brown side. And it just went on and on. You're like, oh man, that's breaking my heart seeing this. But then it got worse because they started asking black children those same questions and they were following those same stereotypes.
Yeah.
And like, which friend, if you had a friend, which one would be nicer? And it would be this one. And it's stereotypes that even they're being exposed to that's causing them to see their world in a certain way.
About themselves.
Yeah, about themselves.
That they're not as smart as white kids, right? Yeah. Like they're, and that is heartbreaking.
And there's absolute zero, to be clear, there's zero evidence that color has anything to do with intelligence, or that one ethnicity is smarter than another ethnicity. There's stereotypes of that. Oh, the Germans are engineers, and they're, these are, and the Asian people are smart in math. And I mean, yeah, you can find, again, if that's your filter, you can find examples to confirm those things. But when you start using research to study things, and you're looking at groups as a whole, there's differences based on what each group has been exposed to and allowed to experience. But there's otherwise, if you would raise, different ethnicities, like cross them over and raise them like the other side, it would be the same. So there's zero evidence that of any of that, but it's culturally, because of movies, books, TV shows, it's so ingrained in our system. It's really sad.
But I really like the way that it was very helpful for me, the difference between judging an individual and then judging a group using these stereotypes. Like, because again, I don't like, most people that know me know I don't like, I say all the time, I don't like stereotypes, and especially about generational ones. Now, that being said, I've still learned them. I still have them, but
Can't avoid them.
And so you said Asian people are good at math. That's judging a group, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure that there's an Asian person that's not good at math, but really good at something else.
There's a lot of them,
right?
And
Like, so
comedians will make that joke, like, I had to be the one Asian that couldn't do math type of jokes, because it's like, and Asians can't drive. I mean, there's those, that's
but
like, that's not true.
those that stand-up comic or those jokes, they build or reinforce my schemas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, wow, kind of depressing, but also not uplifting. But you have to expose yourself to more people, to get out and be around them, in order to kind of reframe the schemas that have been built.
And can I give one more example of how they hinder real quick?
Please.
They can create memory distortions. So when you're trying to recall an event that's happened in the past, you're recalling it based on a framework of knowledge you have of that event, your mental model of how things work. So it's really easy for the details to be altered in some way to better fit our expectations or our existing knowledge, or by filling in the gaps or whatever based on a schema, what we expect. And so we have our ways of saying, I know what my beliefs are. So as I'm calling something up, it's not just as information flows in, as we're experiencing the world, that it goes through schemas, but as we're recalling information, they flow through schemas as well. And that affects how we interpret the memory of the event we had. And I think I told a couple of episodes ago about the police officer in London.
Oh yeah, London.
Police.
Tell that one again, please.
Well, I was invited to give a talk to a group of, I don't know, there's 200 or 300 investigators. So they were higher up in investigating in the London Met. And during a break, one of them came up to me and said, schemas were one of the things I mentioned. It wasn't really the topic of the talk, but this officer said, something's been bothering me. I can't get past. It's when I got called, my partner and I were called to a man who was waving a machete on St. Paul Cathedral steps, and there were people gathered around and people were endangered. And so a lot of us arrived to try to settle this event and make sure nobody was hurt. And, I was hollering at people to stand back. We were staying away from the person a little bit and trying to talk to the person to settle them down, but also keep people back because crowds started gathering to watch, and we were trying to keep them back. And after the event, and it turned out okay, nobody was hurt or harmed. He was just asked in his post briefing, like, where were you standing in this event? And he said, I was standing right here, at the cathedral steps. And they said, where was your partner? Well, he was behind me to the right. And they were like, do you want to think about that and answer it again? He's like, no, he was right behind me to my right. They're like, no, he wasn't. And he said, yes, he was right. And they said, no, he was across. And it's like, no, he wasn't. I remember him. I distinctly remember him behind me to my right. And they showed CCTV, and his partner, when they arrived, immediately had gone way around to his left and was on the other side of the person. And if, when this officer was looking at the person, his partner was standing kind of just past there. He should have seen him multiple
You should have
times,
seen him. Yeah.
but he didn't. And he said, this still bothers me because nothing happened where I had to go to court to answer any questions. But if something would have happened and I would have had to answer those, I mean, my colleagues and those that were asking me questions thought I was lying, and I wasn't lying. He said, I still see him in my mind behind me to my right. And that's, my first question was, when you and your partner approach an event, how do you usually approach the event? He said, well, I'm the person that contacts and talks to people. My partner stands behind me to my right and kind of as an oversight to watch around me and make sure things are safe. And I said, that was your schema. You built that over so many times that you were partially underwater. Your brain was underwater with the event. Mm-hmm. So your conscious brain wasn't pulling in the information, wasn't aware of where your partner was standing. So when the question was asked and you're recalling your memory, it's flowing through those schemas of where was your partner? Well, he's always behind me to my right. So that's where I remember him. And he said, I could still see him in my mind at that event behind me to my right. But that's a schema and how a schema can distort your memories. If you don't have all of the information firmly locked in a memory, your schema is going to help fill in those gaps.
That is
that was the other thing I was wanting to mention.
Yeah, I'm glad that you went back over that, because it does play. And we have an upcoming episode on memory, which we'll probably talk about this again. But but again, we've talked about how many different kinds of schemas we have, and how they're formed. And then now my memory of an event, not even a guy on the steps with a machete, just an interaction we have at a get together or whatever, depending on the situation. But schemas now are kind of getting into the memory consolidation and retelling of an event. So where I tell you this happened, you're like, I was there. That's not what happened. But in my brain, that is absolutely what happened. I'm sure of it.
Based on similar experiences you've had in the past.
Yeah.
Kind of inform you of probably what happened.
Yeah.
So could we schedule a future podcast where we go more in depth into schemas, and not just what they are, but talk about their ramifications to society, to individuals, to your job, how they affect you at your job? And can we have an episode where we talk about some things like that?
I think that's going to be our next episode. We have to dig a little bit deeper, because I'll just tell you, for me, I think I feel more comfortable saying I understand schemas better than I did before we started talking today. But and we've kind of dipped our toe in the pool of how this affects me on a daily basis and how I can do some things about it. But I don't feel comfortable on the practical application of, okay, what to do with this information to make my life better. Yeah. So I think next episode, if we could just continue this, but with a little bit more kind of real world application, for lack of a better term.
Awesome. Sounds
because today really was great. I have to thank you, because I was being sincere in the beginning when I said, schemas are a fun word to say, but I still have no idea what they are and how they work. And I feel more comfortable now that I know what they are, kind of know how they work, but we're not done with this. So
I agree.
But thank you for all that information. I found it really fascinating, and I can't wait to talk about schemas some more.
Let's do it again soon.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
All right.